All right, it's 12:01. We'll go ahead and get started with the introductions, allow other people time to join. Again, thank you all for joining today. Good afternoon on behalf of the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our monthly webinar series that discusses topics relevant to the government contractors. Our topic today is how to prepare your organization for the infamous CMMC certification. We have a very well-informed speaker with us today, Ali. He's the CEO of BlueSteel Cybersecurity. Our moderator today is going to be a board member of the Asian American Chamber of Commerce and president of Mobomo, Ken Feng. He's going to be moderating this session. I just want to welcome all of you. My name is Reena Bhatia. I'm the CEO of ProposalHelper BidExecs and also a board member of the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. If you're not already a member, we encourage you to please join the chamber. In addition to our members receiving a copy of the webinar slides and recordings first, there's a lot of other things you can do. We have networking sessions, a lot of teaming happens in our networking sessions, so a great chamber to be part of. Please consider joining the chamber and sponsoring our events. A quick disclaimer before we get started, and I hand off the microphone to Ken. This webinar is for informational purposes only. There's no legal advice and no legal opinions. There are no legal opinions here. So please treat it as informational only. Please do not copy this material without written permission from the Chamber of Commerce. If you need to reuse this material for any purposes, please reach out to one of us before you do so. With that, I am going to hand it off. One more housekeeping here. For networking purposes, please share your contact information in the chat box. The chat line is open if you want to network with each other. If you have questions related to the content from today, please use the Q&A box so that our moderator has all the questions in one place. With that, Ken, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Reena, and thanks to everybody for taking a little time out of your Friday to join us. It's an exciting topic with CMMC, and as you'll hear from our keynote today, a very quickly changing arena, especially with administration changes and that sort of thing. So I'm going to give a quick bio and then turn it over to Ali, who has been not only a business acquaintance, but a long-term friend. We've worked together through many different companies, actually. And I truly respect, his deep knowledge of any subject that he digs into. So you're in for a treat. There's no questions that he won't tackle and give you an honest, detailed answer if he knows it, right? Again, CMMC is a quickly moving target. So, but a quick bio. First and foremost, Ali is a dedicated husband, proud dad to 3 amazing kids. He's a passionate entrepreneur, cybersecurity nerd, car enthusiast, data storyteller, and technologist who currently serves as the CEO for BlueSteel Cybersecurity. As CEO for BlueSteel Cybersecurity, a CMMC RPO, the mission is to deliver a new approach in intelligent cybersecurity protection, certification, engineering, and strategy services. As a CMMC RPO, Ali and his team work with the government contracting firms to prepare for CMMC Level 3, NIST 800-171 requirements. With 20 years of experience leading technology companies, from tech-focused problem solving to the creation of consumer and business applications and platforms, Ali is great at taking what a small specialized group understands and communicating that to the mass market. So without further ado, Ali, you want to take it over?
I do. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate the introduction. I have a slide deck that I prepared for everyone. Hopefully everyone can see that. And to sort of walk you through the subject. So I'll be the first one to tell you that this is a evolving subject, right? It has a lot of directions this can go in. And And so what I'm going to operate off of is information that we have up to this point, what's considered official. And then there's some areas of speculation, and this is really difficult to sort of respond to, because at the end of the day, we don't want to work with misinformation. So going through it. So what will we cover in this presentation? I want to talk about what CMMC is. Most of you probably already know, so we'll briefly talk about it. The differences between the certification levels. There's a lot of designations that are being thrown out there: RPOs, RPs, C3PAOs, applications that have sort of the magic bullet solution to get you through CMMC compliance. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Process and timeline. I think that's really important because, again, this is sort of, scope for a lot of this hasn't been fully defined. And I can kind of share some of my experiences with this process and kind of give you an idea of what to expect. Diving into budget. So we get a lot of questions about budget. How much is this going to cost? Because, a lot of the organizations that are trying to go for certification will have to upfront the cost. So we'll cover those topics. Will it be required outside of DoD? We'll talk a little bit about that. The prime versus subcontractor role in this, we'll cover that topic as well. And then I think towards the end, talking about lessons learned from the field. So I'm going to share a lot of the experiences that I've run into while helping organizations go through preparation, talking to the assessors, talking to a lot of people in the ecosystem and all across the board, just to see what are certain things that are popping up, and there's quite a bit that everyone wants to address and sort of help move this down the road. And then finally, it's karma points. I like saying karma points because I think my intention, as Ken mentioned, done a lot of businesses, and one of the rules that I always live by is share as much information you can to help the next person. It sort of pays itself back. So I also have a little bit of surprise to kind of give you guys a sense of my sense of humor towards the end. All right. Ken touched on this about my background. I think the most important aspect of this is, we as an organization and myself as an individual are part of the CMMC AB ecosystem. And really, it's just more in the sense that I've been putting a lot of primary focus onto this subject and really trying to assess how organizations can get through this cleanly and efficiently. We'll talk about NIST 800-171 requirements because it has been in effect for a while. And so this is how it, we'll talk about how that all plays into level 3 and beyond, and just in CMMC in general. All right, so what is CMMC? Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. One of the things that, as someone that's passionate about cybersecurity and just helping organizations protect their information, a maturity model in most things is a really helpful benchmark, right? If you think about it in a sense outside of the requirement of having to do business with DoD, in general, it's a tool, it's a process that we can use in order to help guide our organizations to sort of roadmap our cybersecurity posture. And I think, ultimately the idea, the concept is great. I think, in reality, we should be more secure as operationally as businesses. It really just has to balance itself out, right? And, part of this, a lot of the conversations and why this whole process is changing constantly is because, there is a significant cost that goes into this, and we want to, the AB is really trying to work out how to really balance this all out in conjunction with the DoD. And who is the CMMC AB? Well, they're the nonprofit organization that oversees and manages qualifying or qualifying trained assessors, right? So when you're talking about C3PAOs, and we'll get into that, the assessors have to go through training and certification. The AB handles that. Also, the AB handles a lot of the submissions in order to get through this certification by assessors. All right, so key items to know. CMMC will be a phased-in approach. A lot of you might know this, maybe a lot of you might not know this, but the outlook of how this requirement is going to take effect on all contracts moving into DoD specifically is planned for 2026. So meaning by 2026, the idea is to have all contracts carry this requirement with different level designations depending on what the requirements are. The idea was to start in Q4 in 2020. I think that's pushed a little bit, but we're starting to see some qualifications and requirements coming in. They're requiring CMMC level certification. To cut to the chase, subcontractors will be required to meet some CMMC material level requirements. We'll talk about that later. Really, that's on dependent on whether or not the subcontractor will need to handle COI data. If not, there are other ways around it. We'll kind of address that towards the later half of the presentation. This kind of gives you an idea of when we talk about level CMMC certification levels, what levels pertain to what type of data. So level 1 and 2 are related to FCI data. And so FCI data is really, the basics of the contract, the COTAR's information, certain things that are not necessarily pertaining to the specs of the project that is being worked on. It's just more of sort of the basic, I would say more privacy, basic level information. And then level 3 above is COI, and this is where you get into content that's either generated by the government that's specifically meant for the project, or the vendor or contractor that creates the same amount of type of data as it relates to the project. So these are, one great example is sort of your scope of work or technical details of what you're working on. I'm sort of talking in a technology context. So if you're working on software requirements or working on technology pieces, those have a good chance of falling under COI. And then, as I said, with any new program, expect changes to occur periodically. And what you're seeing is the dynamic between the private sector, as it relates to DoD, and then you have the AB sort of in the middle. A lot of people have a lot of concerns, questions, and they're essentially processing these things one by one. The organizations themselves don't have a lot of staff and resources to sort of accomplish this as fast as they would like. And I think, as time goes on, we'll see a lot of changes or updates to this program. All right, so let's talk about the differences between the certification levels. So level 1 and 2. So level 1 has 17 practices, has 0 policies or procedures that you need to capture. So what that really means is that you have 17 technical requirements that you need to abide by. These range from different controls, but basically these are, do you have antivirus? Do you have malware protection? It's a 17 items. Level 1 is pretty easy to obtain if you go through the controls and actually read what's required. As it relates to level 2 ups the amount of controls that an organization needs to abide by, and then starts introducing processes into the mix, right? So these are items of, I believe, about 2 processes that you have to include with level 2. And then from level 3 and beyond is where all these controls and processes, and from level 3 above, it starts with 3 processes, and then as level 4 goes to 4, and then level 5 goes to 5. These have to be managed. So the difference between level 1 and 2, it's sort of, they want to know, do you have these items in place, and do you have these sort of policies and processes identified? When you get into level 3 and above, they want to know whether or not these items are managed, right? And so the differences are, when you get into level 3, each practice and each process has to have 2 forms of verification to prove that it's in practice, right? And so it gets a little bit more intense. As I've mentioned before, level 1 and 2 is going to handle FCI data. It's probably good practice, since level 1 and 2 can be more of a DIY project for many organizations, and level 3 starts to get a little bit more serious, depending on how these RFPs roll out. I always tell everyone, be positioned to start getting yourselves ready for level 3, but in the meantime, work yourself from the starting position of level 1 and gradually get to level 3, depending on your time frame and cycle. All right, so RPOs, C3PAOs, it all sounds like it comes from a Star Wars movie. It's it's interesting, and a lot of these accreditations are going to change as well. When it comes to the individual certifications. Let's start talking about what all these items mean. All right, so C3PAO, these are your third-party assessment organizations, right? These are the organizations that are going to receive your submission when you're ready for assessment. They have what are called certified assessors on their staff and go through the process, essentially auditing and going through all the items that you do submit. They're the ones who are responsible to then interact once they go through their assessment and once everything is completed and there aren't any issues with the submission or the assessment process, they will then submit their package to the AB for final certification approval. RPOs are consulting organizations, right? It's what we are, and I don't mean to diminish it, but it's essentially, what we do is just we help organizations that don't have the resource capability of pulling all the pieces together, getting the technical staff, getting all the controls implemented. We cannot be the ones that do any part of the assessment for you. We're the consulting organization to get you prepared and support you through the assessment process. So if a situation occurs that once we do the submission with the C3PAO and they find something that needs to be resolved, we would be the supporting organization to help you. We would manage controls. But how we are registered is we go through a series of background checks. We do sign an agreement with the AB to make sure that there is some accountability in our practice. So we want to be accountable for what we provide as services to organizations and to make sure that we're providing the right service. That's really important. This is a very important topic. For getting certification alone, we want to help companies protect their information, regardless of whether you're an RPO or not. The goal should be that we just got to make sure that we put all the puzzle pieces together to ensure everyone, is okay with moving forward. And I talked about this, as a consulting organization, RPOs cannot lead or manage assessments. So that's the role of the C3PAO and the certified assessors. The certified assessors that are on staff have to be certified in the level that you're trying to go after. So what that means is that if there's a certified assessor that's only certified for level 2, they cannot be the ones that assess your organization for level 3. They have to be a level 3 at the same level certification that you're looking for or above. This is interesting. So many might not know this, but C3PAOs in particular can be RPOs. So they can do the consulting to help prep, and they can do the assessment, but what they can't do is both for the same organization. And so really what that means is, if you're ready to do assessment and you engage with a C3PAO for an assessment, they can't provide you RPO services or consulting services. They're in the assessment process, and then vice versa. If they're the RPO, they can't do assessment aspects. They have to kind of keep that separated in order to maintain accountability. So I get this question a lot. Is there a magic bullet that can take care of all the certification leads, or certification requirements, and all the items there? I'd love to say yes. What I can say, there are a lot of solutions that take care of a great amount of chunks from the controls, right? So there's some solutions that can take care of like 30 or 40 out of 130 controls when you're talking about level 3. So there are things that can really make this efficient, that you don't have to have a solution for each and every control. But there isn't necessarily an app that can take care of all aspects that go involved I'm really talking about level 3 and beyond. Level 1 and 2 is a little bit of an easier proposition where there are, again, tools that could take care of potentially elements of it. But from my understanding, I haven't seen one that actually can take care of the complete picture. All right, so what's the process and timeline to get this done? All right, so step 1 is preparation. Anything like this, you want to make sure that you do your due diligence, see what you have as far as current policies and procedures. You might be an organization that has a lot of this stuff taken care of. So it's good to grab and build up your inventory and organize it. You want to know what sort of resources you have on staff. This is an important aspect to it, because if you don't have, and usually I do a rule of 3, you have a CISO, an ISO. So a CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer, is an executive level person that can handle the information security needs for your organization. CIOs can also fill that role. And then information security officers, these are sort of your managers in the sense of managing the program. And then systems engineer, these are the ones that individuals that would implement the technical controls. So when you go through all the technicality of implementing, software monitoring, you want to have an engineer that's available to do this. And that's your basic team makeup. And seeing what pieces of that you already have and what you can actually dedicate to this. BD focus, so business development focus. As an entrepreneur, I look at this as probably one of the most important aspects. Do you have something in the pipeline that you're going to go after that's going to require a CMMC? If you don't, then my recommendation would be to take your time to do the preparation for this. If you do, and you know the timeline is short, then of course you're going to want to start getting on this process sooner rather than later. But it's really important to know that part of this is being able to really position the organization to go after projects that are going to provide you a return on investment. And if you don't have an opportunity in line, it takes this process, it makes it a lot difficult on a budgetary standpoint, because you're front loading a lot of cash and not really knowing how you're going to see the return on it. Level and requirement. So getting comfortable with what levels are available, what level you want to achieve as an organization, and get a general understanding of requirements. Create a controlled implementation plan. So this is a little bit of something that we usually create for our customers, but we call it the CIP. And it's basically a list of all the controls that are required for the level certification, and coming up with, initial ideas of how we're going to implement, right? It's a long meeting and it's one of those meetings where the details matter. It's important to go through. I would suggest doing this internally with your key stakeholders, just to figure out whether or not you have all the controls under, have an idea how you're going to handle all the different level of controls, and then doing a self-assessment. Now, there are different ways you can do that. Our company we usually give out a lot of these self-assessments out to people so that they can start doing and scoring themselves to see where they land. But there's also ones that are, freely available that the government issues out, and then I believe the AV has out as well. All right, so then once you're prepared, it's now time to start looking at execution, right? This is really your build process for the technology-focused organizations. You're trying to build your policies and your procedures. You want to make sure that they're enforced. So this is where your security awareness training comes into play. You want to stand up the infrastructure. So what that means is that, companies that initially come to us for readiness usually have the ambition to get their entire organization covered. We usually look at where they are based on the preparation aspects of it and try to determine whether or not it makes sense to do this organizationally wide, or is it better to separate and put an enclave together? You want to be able to start thinking about, more pre-assessment drills. If you're doing this on your own for level 1 or 2, or even level 3 and above, you might want to think about engaging with an RPO or a C3PAO on this. Again, with the C3PAO, just be careful. You want to make sure you choose the one that you're gonna go with as far as an assessment is concerned. I have referrals if anyone needs it. but you want to keep in mind that if you're asking for consulting advice, you can't necessarily use them for assessment. And then step 3 is assessment time, right? So you have done everything that you needed. You have your policies and procedures. You are a rock star with all your controls. You've got it handled. You're ready for assessment. You contact the C3PAO. They start to begin the process for it. Just like in an audit, they go through everything that they can find. If they do find things, you have 90 days to resolve any findings. This is where the resources or whether or not you outsource this component, just having that support element. So if findings do come up, you just want to make sure that you can resolve them quickly within that time frame. Step 4 is once the C3PAO has done their assessment, and then they submit it to the AB. And during this time, the AB can come back with findings, and it's up to the entirety of the team to sort of address those findings. No one has gone through this process yet, so I couldn't give you an idea of what that looks like and what the probability of that is, because again, this is all new. But there is a possibility that could happen, and having to go through a process of making sure that we address those issues. All right, and then once you're certified, it's 3 years. So what that really means is that if you're in any one of these levels, you have to still have the controls in practice, right? So having a monthly support in place where you have a plan and you're continuously in practice and making sure that you are in compliance of every one of these controls makes the 3-year assessment process. So what ends up happening, 3 years come up, you have to gauge again with the C3PAO to do a renewal. Again, no one knows what that process looks like yet because we haven't gotten there. But chances are, if you have you've gone through assessment, you have your infrastructure in place, this should be a relatively smooth process. Fingers crossed. But again, it happens every 3 years, and we have to yet see what that looks like. Timeline 6 to 8 months at least. So this is going back to step 1 about the BD focus. So if you know that you're going to, let's say, hypothetically, we're talking about a contract that we want to go after this year, we got to get into preparation and execution now. Preparation takes about 3 months alone, and in some cases, and that's dependent on how many policies and procedures you have already documented, what infrastructure you already have in place to manage, what does your enclaves look like for CMMC. We have to get all that stuff together, and then execution is, standing everything up and operating from. And so you want at least 6 months to operate off of this new setup so that you can prove and show that you've been operating successfully and that there haven't been any issues. All right, so how much should I budget for? This is the most important slide, I think. Because again, it's as small organizations, it's tough to bear the bill on this. For companies like us, we recognize that, and there are many other organizations out there that see this too. And how do we figure out how do we support this while trying to meet the compliance obligations? So we're all in this together to try to figure out the best direction. All right, so preparation costs, right? This is for level 3 and above. As I mentioned, for preparation, it's probably best for level 1 and 2 for organizations to do it on your own. This saves you a lot in terms of costs, especially again, if you have the resources or the know-how. Getting a checklist together, and if anyone needs that, please feel free to reach out and be happy to provide that. But normally preparation costs, from what I hear from what we charge and from what I hear from other RPO organizations or anyone doing preparation costs, it ranges from like 10 to 30K. And it really depends on the size of the organization and the level of work. Execution. So this is your continuous coverage. These costs range widely as well. Again, it depends on the size of the organization, the level that they're trying to achieve, but they've ranged from anywhere from $500 to $25,000. Why is that range such a broad range? Because if you think about it, one of the benefits of looking at CMMC now, if let's say you're a smaller organization, you don't have to have many employees covered as far as a control mechanism is concerned, right? So if let's say you're less than a 10-man shop and a 10-person shop, then ultimately that would mean that people that would handle COI would be less than 5, and that you would have a separate enclave, and you're only really covering, like, say, 2 or 3 users. It becomes pretty cheap to sort of implement. So there is a difference between taking advantage of your size and your circumstance now versus later on, where if you have more individuals or you get close to winning a contract that's going to require a lot of people on staff, there's, again, different ways to kind of price this out to sort of make it more affordable. One note to mention here, does not include internal resource costs. So that's an important one because you have resources. If you're a consulting organization, billable utilization is important here, and how much you're taking away from that. These are all things that we kind of work with other organizations to sort of figure out, because you want to cost this appropriately in order to figure out the return. All right, so assessments, right? Assessments have their own cost. So wide range, because honestly, no one actually knows. No one's going through assessments officially. Everything is in provisional. So it ranges. One of the things that I have heard from, in terms of feedback or concern from C3PAOs and assessors, is that the more complete the package is, and it doesn't have tiny little red flags here and there, or things that are not really well thought out, the cheaper it's going to be. I think that's true of most things. And in this case, again, 500 to 200,000 is a big range, but $5,000 to $200,000, excuse me, it's a wide range. But as we start getting the window of assessment process through, which is anticipated, hopefully sometime later this year, then we're going to start seeing these costs a little bit more defined. So I put this out there. Costs can be included in response that requires CMMC. Now, these are costs, and this sort of changed, but the official stance right now, to my understanding, is only level 1 costs. It was rumored that level 3 costs were going to be able to be included in responses. However, the official stance right now is level 1. It might change. We can talk about, there's a ton in the sense of grants, state grants that can help cover the cost. There are different other methods that organizations can look at in order to recoup these costs. But the official stance right now from the DoD is that level 1 costs are allowed in responses. And as I mentioned, state grants programs are available. I know Maryland has one. Different states, depending on where your organization is based, there are some grants that are available to cover a portion of the costs in order to prepare. The continuous and ongoing is a little bit of a different subject, and it's trying to figure that element out. And again, BD is a really important element, because you want to make sure that as your cost rises as an organization, from a BD perspective, you can start thinking about, the idea of your overheads going higher as well. So, even though the DoD is not going to specifically reimburse you for level 3 costs, this does become an overhead cost that your organization does have to support, regardless of whether or not CMMC or not. So there's some thought processes that can go into that. So will CMMC be required outside of DoD? Short answer is all early signs point to yes. I'm not definitive on that, right? Because anything could happen, right? But as of February 2021, GSA has already started its preparation and guidance for CMMC and civilian-based contracts. However this plays out, I know that if you think about it, the motivation of the government is to protect information, whether it's classified or not classified. And, we'll talk about this, but the NIST 800 and 171, the DFARS rule there has been around for a while. And that was the intent to be more, self-guided, and organizations needing to agree to it, to live by it, right? So now CMMC is sort of the next step in order to really make this a real thing, and it's putting a lot of pressure. But, is this going to go beyond? My opinion is yes. It's just I'm not sure what's shape and form and what requirement by when is going to take effect. Meaning, does everyone have to be level 3 by next month type of deal? No one's really sure for right now. And then as a maturity model provides guidance to help organizations roadmap. So, we work with a lot of DoD federal contractors, civilian-based federal contractors, but we also do a lot of work on the commercial sector. And, it's interesting, a lot of these organizations are developing their security roadmaps. And I tend to reference CMMC just because it has, the controls figured out as a level guidance, as a benchmark, right? And so, we're a creative shop, so we try to figure out ways to, benchmark and develop roadmaps that are very digestible by the organization, because a lot of this means rollout, and that also has associated costs. So, as a maturity model, it's a great benchmark for us when we talk non-government DoD level requirements. All right, so does CMMC apply to prime contractors only? I sort of mentioned this, and I said it does apply to subs as well, but then the question really is, will the sub be handling COI data, right? I know that there were a lot of subs that I've been talking to. Their primes have adjusted things as this requirement has been coming out, either setting up enclaves of their own or just not providing COI data, right? And so, the question is, how will all this play out? Will the subcontractor still be able to do what's needed? Will they have to dial back their services? These are still up in the air and in question. Some of the primes I know are setting up or gearing up to provide CMMC certified networks to provide access to subs, so that if they do provide COI level data, that they have some level of accountability or control over the environment and how the work is being done. Again, these are all rumors. These are things that I've heard as far as strategies until the assessment windows open up, and whether or not these processes get fully approved is yet to be in question. But there's a lot of organizations sort of gearing up for this and trying to figure out alternative solutions. The other side to this is on-site work, right? So there's a lot of companies we do talk to that primarily do a lot of on-site government work. They're on location and they're issued government tech. That technically doesn't need to follow the CMMC guidelines for your organization. So if you have a lot of people that you have staff and they have nothing to do with your, mainline organizational infrastructure, they are primarily focused on their government project they're on and only have the government issued tech, then chances are you don't need to necessarily worry about it. It's only when they have to interact with your infrastructure. So, one possibility is with a lot of us being remote, and maybe you have an office space, if they come and access the network at the office space that's not within CMMC compliance and they're using the government issued tech, that becomes a problem. So there's a lot of things to talk about there and a lot of scenarios that can be played out. But to make it kind of easy, if it's all sort of consolidated in that environment for these kind of conditions, you should be okay. And then I put down, how competitive do you want to be? As subs and being a sub ourselves, we always want to stay competitive, right? You want to make sure that you have the level of certification. I learned early on, the more certifications I can obtain as an organization, the more attractive I will become. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be CMMC certified, but for those who've gone through CMMI or through ISO certifications, you kind of understand the value of what that translates to the impression of your with your customer. All right, so lessons learned from the field. So I want to share some things that I've learned personally through the process of helping different organizations go through this, and hopefully it helps you. All right, so first lesson is, once you start, don't stop. All right, so if you are trying to go for level 3, you've hired a company like us to help you prep and go through the process of execution. What you don't want to do is go through preparation and then stop after preparation and sort of kill the momentum of all the progress you made on building your processes and procedures, all your documents, starting to plan out how you're going to handle the controls and making sure that you got everything in place. Because once you start the process, there's an audit trail with all the documentation you've created, which means what sort of changes have you made? If you have a network infrastructure that you're designating as your CMMC network or the one that's going to handle COI, you have to do vulnerability scans on it to make sure it's always in compliance, and that has to be refreshed periodically. And so if you have a time gap, you have to provide an explanation to the assessor. So once you start, the ideal scenario is just don't stop. Whether you take it in internally or not, it's up to you. But you just want to keep, at the very least, keep the documentation alive that you created. Make sure you have the resources. We sort of touched on this. Resources are key, internal, external. The value proposition of keeping it internal is that you put a lot of the subject matter internal and you have it in-house. It's easier to manage and keep track of. You can use those resources for other things beyond CMMC. If you do outsource, you have a cost savings. So hopefully the ones that are presenting you the proposals are providing a cost savings as an added benefit. But also, again, you should be able to leverage those resources outside of CMMC only, to sort of help your organization have a better security posture. All right, forgetting CMMC. Let's say you don't care, you don't want to do anything. If you have a DoD contract, chances are you agreed to the NIST 800-171 requirements. Which is DFARS clause, the specific DFARS clause that I mentioned here. This is important because in this 800-171, if you look at level 3 CMMC, it's 130 controls. And this 800-171 is 110. So you have a delta of 20 controls that separates NIST 800-171, which you technically have already agreed to, versus level 3. I suggest if people are not really interested in CMMC certification right now, and you do have active contracts that you have agreed to this DFARS clause, I highly suggest going through NIST 800-171 requirements and making sure you're in compliance with those controls. The penalties are pretty hefty if you go through it, and you might want to get that checked out. You do not need third parties to go through this. There's self-assessments. We have them. You can go through it, especially if you have the resources. But this is the one important aspect I tell everyone: make sure you're in compliance of, because it is a requirement as of today. We talked about this BD opportunities. Identify the RFP opportunities first. It's like, as an entrepreneur, business owner, I can't stress that enough. This is the ROI part. It's important to really identify that. So you make sure all of this is sort of, yes, we're trying to protect information and we don't want to leak it to put information in the wrong hands. That's a focus that we have, a passion of ours. However, there is a reality of cost, right? And so how do we mitigate these costs? How do we put in a place where the organization is not hurt by trying to achieve these certifications? Culture adoption is critical for level 3. One of the things with these policies and procedures that are going to come apparent is when you go through assessment, the assessor will randomly choose an employee that's going to be handling COI to find out whether or not they are practicing the policies you put in place. And so we focus a lot about creating policies that are relatable to the culture and providing security training around this. But if you're going to handle this on your own or work with another vendor, make sure that this is a key item that you work on. Cultural adoption is big, and it's not as easy as just showing everyone this. They have to be in practice. Don't underestimate the controls. So what I mean by that is I've heard a lot in the terms of like the big names like Google and Microsoft are coming out or focusing on CMMC to make sure that their solutions are in compliance. But got to keep in mind, if you go through all the controls, they only cover a portion of this. So even if you're using Office 365, even though you're using a piece of what's going on, it doesn't cover everything. And that's going to become apparent for those that feel like they're going to be postured to go through the assessment. Once the assessment happens, I think it's going to be something that's going to come out where there's a lot more that you got to do In addition, especially when you're talking, and I should be clear, this is when you're talking about level 3 and up. Level 1 and 2 is a little bit of a different story. When to ask for help. For those who are C-level entrepreneurs, the differences, or the example I mentioned here, LegalZoom versus a lawyer, right? Ken and I talked about this, kind of joked around a little bit. At what stage does it make sense to try to figure out the LegalZoom approach to solving this challenge versus when it's time to ask for a lawyer's help? And I would say if you really don't have anything in place and you're really trying to build up the puzzle pieces here, the LegalZoom approach to this is that you could use different components. Level 1 and 2, it makes this a little bit easier. You can take the LegalZoom approach to it. When it gets to level 3, there's a level of trying to take what you create as far as policy and make it and introduce adoption to your culture. There's as you go through the list, you'll see it's a little bit more challenging to take a LegalZoom approach to it. Overall, one suggestion when I get into this is I tell everyone this is a program, not a task. So there's a different mindset shift. This is more of a long-term, evolving thing, whereas a task is sort of a checkbox and you're sort of marking, you can forget about it. It's not a task. It is definitely a program. You got to treat it like a program to make sure that you're always in compliance, because as you're making investments to this, you don't want to work backwards. You want to keep moving forward and evolve as things change. And I've said this many times throughout the presentation. Level 1 and 2, I feel, are DIY programs. I don't think you need to hire anyone for this. I am more than happy to help anyone go through this if you do need help. But when you go through the controls, there are a lot of solutions. I have a ton of them. Feel free to ask me. I'm happy to share that. And then finally, these are some of the examples of documents needed for level 3. It's a lot. And so it kind of gives you an idea of the things that if you don't have this, I'm going to kind of pause for a second so everyone can see this. But there are items here that you want to make sure you have. Companies like ours sort of capture a lot of these things within the SOP, so the security operating plan. And then other elements in the SSP, but there are some companies that like to make these individualized so that it's easily more referenceable. All right, questions. And before we kind of get to that, it's Friday. And for those who are on here that know me, I'm great with dad jokes. We mentioned I'm a father of 3 kids. And I like to throw something out there. I know this is a topic that's important for a lot of organizations, so I don't mean to diminish it, but it is Friday, so I'd love to introduce some humor. Here's your joke. My friend just became CEO of a garbage bag company, and here's the punchline. He got a hefty contract. And my hope is that with everyone on this call, that I've given at least some information that was helpful. Because I would love to see everyone win their contracts and do it in the right way. And if I can be part of that right way in helping you answer questions, I'd love to. And I'll leave this screen up. And I don't know, Ken, now is the time for me to pass it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Ali. That was fantastic. A lot of information to digest. So I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose there. So I really appreciate you saying that. And your contact information is up there. I appreciate you being available to our members and our attendees for any questions, the checklist, that sort of thing, or whatever. Feel free to reach out to Ali, take his information down there. We've had a bunch of questions kind of streaming in. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because we only have 10 minutes left. There's a question that's about what is the latest information concerning reciprocity for ISO 27001 concerning CMMC maturity level 3. So I guess is there reciprocity between ISO and CMMC?
So that hasn't, based on some of the town halls, I know that has been asked before, and I don't have an official answer to that yet, right? Or they haven't issued anything really official. I think it's something that they're still trying to work on, but if the person that asked that question wants to reach out to me, as soon as I find out, I can reach back out and give you that answer. Or if anyone that's interested, please reach out. More than happy to give you the official answer.
Thanks, Ari. Second one is, how does a home-based business that does not have any computer resources except for the owner's laptop obtain this certification?
So it depends on the certification, right? One suggestion is to set up a cloud environment, right? We've had some, again, with a lot of these small organizations and everyone being remote, I'm just providing an example of this. It's not like you have to specifically do it in the way I'm sort of telling you, but basically one suggestion is set up a AWS cloud environment that is a subdomain. So if, let's say you have, www.yourcompany.com, you have something that says coi.yourcompanyname.com or is designated to that. One of the challenges is sort of the end user's device accessing this network. So let's say we're still all remote and you went through the trouble of creating this environment, right? Your mothership that's CMMC compliant. But what do you do about the individual's devices? Well, one way is to make them what's considered no memory devices, right? So they're all virtualized. There's downsides to that, which are, you have a really great internet connection, but no memory devices don't necessarily have to be monitored. If it is a memory device system, then what I would say is that it should be issued in a rollout for the organization, and it has to be monitored. So you'd have to go through a series of making sure that device is controlled, meaning this is only CUI related data. We're not going to put anything on here that's going to handle or do anything else. If it's in a home network, that home network has to be configured so that it's separated from the main network. I can bore you everyone to death about this. I can get more specific if you need it, but there are strategies to do it. You just have to sort of architect it in the right way, and then it should be compliant.
Thanks, Ori. So another variation on the reciprocity question. I understand some of the requirements from CMMI certification and ISO will have a crossover, even though CMMC is cybersecurity driven and the others are more business process quality assurance driven. If a company is currently choosing between CMMI and ISO, is there one of the two that would better prepare an organization for CMMC?
That's a great question. I actually don't know. I don't know the specific answer to that because it really depends on the level of CMMI that you're trying to achieve. With ISO, I do know there's a lot in terms of processes that you can adapt towards. But when it comes to CMMI, I think it's based on the level set. I would say that let's separate CMMC into two different buckets for right now, right? You got your policies and procedures, and then you got your technical management of controls, right? I think a lot of these policies and procedures can be taken. There's cross-pollination between ISO and CMMI. Just it's a matter of determining which, again, with the level question, the CMMI, how much sort of takes up that you can kind of recreate or position for the requirements for policies on CMMC level 3. And then obviously the controls are a little bit different, and you can kind of go through the control list. But that was a long-winded, I'm not sure, but it's a great question. And if you want to follow up with me, give me a day or so, I can figure that out for you.
Thanks. We have been told that in order to achieve ML3 for CMMC, you must upgrade your Microsoft 365 to Microsoft 365 GCC or GCC High. Is there any truth to this?
So this is Microsoft's CMMC compliant upsell, I think. So Amazon's going to do this. It's going to be so with those using Amazon services like their GovCloud, there are different services that they're going to try to position for this. It's true if that's going to be your primary environment for CMMC. You want to make sure, because again, like I said, this thing changes so much. If they're positioned for CMMC, you want to ask the question, will you generate all the requirements in terms of policies and procedures that I'm going to need in order to fulfill the requirements of CMMC, right? If they don't give you an answer to that just yet, I think they do, but if they don't, then it's questionable, because you ultimately your documentation is going to have to cover what your environment is, and their hive, so to speak, is your CMMC environment, and it should carry the documentation to support.
Got it. Okay. Would you suggest a whole network scope or a CUI enclave scope strategy?
Great question. So I'll tell you this, a lot of organizations come to me first and say, I want to be organizational wide. My first question or response is why? Do you have, like, the question really comes down to is what do you think your workload's going to be? Like, are you going to primarily handle contracts that are CUI and all staff included are going to be part of that? Or do you feel like that's going to be a subset of your business? Do you do other work for civilian-based agencies that don't carry this requirement? The reason why I say that is because if you're going to be organization-wide, then I think it has to be organization-wide. If you're saying it's not a major component of your business, I would suggest enclave, because it's less impactful, less costly, and I'm a big fan of sort of bootstrapping anything and gradually working my way up as a return of investment and makes itself realized.
Excellent. You mentioned some templates that the AB puts out. Is there a link or a website we can go to in order to get those templates?
So cmmcab.org /FAQ is a great start. As far as assessments are concerned, like the PDFs, reach out to me. I can send you a link. I know if you search on Google, you should be able to find them too. But if you don't want to do that and you want me to do the work for you, reach out. I'm happy to do that for you and send it over. I have it on hand. It's just a long URL. As far as like assessments and some of these PDF downloads that you can get.
Cool, thanks. There was a recent article that the CMMC is under an internal DoD review that could make some big changes. Do you know anything about this review and or how it may affect the current program? Okay,
so at the very least, you got to think about what's possible and what really isn't, likelihood of all this, right? The whole intention of all these programs is to protect the nation's information, right? With these recent hacks of SolarWinds and then the Florida Water Treatment Center, the U.S. is very concerned of cyber threats and cyber attacks, right? And so, yes, I would say, as a very small probability of this program going away, it's very small. I think it's like 0.0000009% of it going away. For those that are thinking, could this go away? But what's really occurring is that the administration is looking at this and trying to figure out better ways of rolling this out when it comes to costs and how organizations need to absorb the costs, right? Because in this 800-171 covering 110 controls, and it is a requirement today, I don't think they're going to try to go backwards in that, right? I think they're going to probably start from that point and then figure out, okay, well, how do we do this? And it could be that some of these contracts that are coming out may not require level 3. They may get 1 or 2. They may try to ease up a little bit on that, but just don't forget NIST 800-171. That one would them requiring them to pull it out of contract after so many people have already agreed to. I would say at least go with the 110 controls and focus on that, and then see how all this stuff shakes out.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we're out of time. Everybody enjoy their weekend. Thank you, Ali, very much again, and for everybody on the. Yep. Go ahead, Reena.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to launch a quick poll here for our audience. I just need to check in on what our audience feels about doing a full 2-hour hands-on training class if we were to do this through the chamber. So if the participants can please take a quick few seconds and answer a question, we'd really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Please answer the poll, and as I mentioned, become an AACC member, because you guys get the slides and all that kind of stuff first.
And Ali, thank you so much. Appreciate you spending time with us. We'll probably be bringing you back for the
sure.
It looks like there is a lot of interest here, that people are interested in learning, especially for the DIY folks, right? The CMMC level 1, just where do we get started and how to do it? There's so much information. It would be awesome to have you back. So we'll probably be imposing on more of your time in the future.
If everyone's okay with more dad jokes, I'm all for it.
Hey, I like that. All right, thank you all. So it looks like 90% are interested in our in having a 2-hour seminar. So
awesome.
Great. Well, you found something around. Thank you all.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.